everyone. Welcome to another show of New Hampshire Citizens for Progress. Today's show, we're going to be talking about recovery services. Do you know someone that could use recovery services? Is there a behavior or a substance that interferes in their life? Well, maybe you know someone that knows someone. Or maybe you are that someone. We're presenting a show that might give you some tools to move forward from that. We have three guests here, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, my name's Frank Staples, more commonly known as Footloose in the community. I am local coordinator for Smart Recovery for the past 4 years now. I opened about 2 years ago the first Smart Recovery-based transitional living program on the East Coast. The only other Smart Recovery housing is in LA.
Thank you.
My name is Elena, and I currently am living at Foot's Smart Recovery Transitional Housing, and so far it's been great.
Thank you.
My name is Molly May. I reside here in Manchester, and I facilitate. I'm one of the leaders at a alternative 12-step program called Celebrate Recovery, which is hosted at Grace Capital Church in Concord, Manchester Christian Church here in Manchester, and we are a Christ-based, faith-led 12-step recovery program.
So, how does the Celebrate Recovery work exactly? How does somebody become is it a facilitator or a host, or it's a leader?
Well, typically it is somebody who is maybe coming out of incarceration, because we have behind the walls teams who go into the men and the women's prison and recovery centers, halfway houses. Some of those men and women elect to come to our Christian churches. Mm-hmm. And instead of participating in a 12-step traditional recovery program, because some of these individuals do not struggle with drug and or alcohol substance abuse. They struggle with a hurt, a habit, a hang-up that could revolve around food or money or anxiety or post-traumatic stress syndrome. So they come to our program to apply the tools in a faith-based or Christ-based program to overcome these hurts, habits, and hang-ups.
Nice.
In Footloose, you have a program that does something different than their program.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we at Smart Recovery, I volunteer as the local coordinator, as I mentioned. We're a secular option. We don't have a religious component to the program, but that doesn't bar anyone who has religion or faith-based programming, or I have my own religion, but that has nothing to do with anybody else, so we don't proselytize or promote any specific religion. We provide tools as well. We have 14 tools. You can go to smartrecovery.org and check them out there. But the idea with SMART, it stands for self-management and recovery training. So our slogan is discover the power of choice. And the idea is to become a self-empowered, self-managing individual who's moved forward through the stages of change process, the 6 stages of change, to the exit stage, and have moved on with their life and are doing what they want to do. Like with our program, we're more than just being sober. That's just a piece of it. And another thing, Smart Recovery, we recently changed our focus. We used to be known as an abstinence-based program, but we're no longer that. We're an abstinence-oriented program, because we do support MAT options, which some people might not know stands for medication-assisted treatment. Things like Suboxone, Subutex, and Vivitrol, and those other options as well.
So those are mostly towards the opioid treatment?
There's things for opioids, there's things for alcohol. Certain ones are, like the Vivitrol is used. There's suggestions that it can be good for all types of drugs and the urges. It kind of just kills the cravings. It doesn't get people high or anything like that. It doesn't activate on it's not a synthetic opioid like maybe the buprenorphine or Suboxone or Subutex is, right? So does anyone have any experience with MAT themselves? I've never done it myself. I've abused the things in the past, but prescription medications, but
I currently am on MAT myself. And, it does, MAT is amazing as far as it is, it's a great way to transition you off of, like opioids that are making your life unmanageable. So then that's where MAT steps in, and it helps you transition from the opioids to completely being able to be off them and not have the withdrawals. So then MAT steps in, and you then are taking Suboxone or the Vivitrol, and the Vivitrol is a shot, but Suboxone, that is something that you would take daily to help so that you don't have those withdrawals and so that you don't have to be on those opioids no more. And for me, it's been helping, and it's but there is a point where at some point you don't want to be on it forever unless it does work for you. But personally, I think it is a great tool that can help.
So going beyond that, besides a substance abuse issue, this is also behavior abuse in regards to other things.
yes. So just like Molly May mentioned with Celebrate, it's for hang-ups and different behavioral things. Smart Recovery, we work for all substances and behaviors, so sex, gambling, overeating, self-harming, anything like that. So we don't identify as addicts. We identify as who we are as people. I'm Footloose, So we have Elena, we have Molly May. That's who we are. That's how we identify. Because once you label yourself as an addict or a junkie or a heroin addict or an alcoholic or a gambler, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and you do the things to maintain that identity.
So in Celebrate Recovery, much like to Foot's point, we don't identify as addicts. We're overcoming, we're celebrating a hurt habit or a hang-up. We're actively making a conscious choice to change that behavior, to take old habits and old actions and do something different and new, in the hopes that we'll have a better or a different outcome. So we never say we're addicts. We are not addicts. We're celebrating something that we are overcoming. We have control of that.
What's the best way for someone to someone's decided that they want to seek services? What's the best way to go about seeking those services?
It depends. Some people might need detox real quick. And they might need to go into treatment. Of course, the problem with treatment is what happens after treatment. Where do people go after? But definitely the detox thing is very important, and that treatment period is important to get people to that stable housing situation. The options are detox, and then usually a 28-day treatment if you have insurance to pay for it.
So it appears that housing is a major issue in this. So someone gets treated 28 days, they go out the door. Now what do?
Did you go through treatment?
Yep, so I went to detox, which was 7 days. That's standard. But then I went on to treatment for 28 days, and throughout the course of treatment, I decided to stay on MAT, which is the Suboxone. And so with that decision also comes, I wasn't quite aware, but if you chose to stay on MAT, then it kind of lessens the kind of housing that you can have. Because right now in the state of New Hampshire, there's not a whole lot of housing for MAT. There's a lot of housing for men and women that choose to be 100% free of MAT treatment. But when you choose to stay on MAT for whatever reason that is, it kind of reduces your options for housing. So I had, I think, 3 options for houses when I was leaving treatment. So I had 3 options, and of those options, 2 of them had a backed up waiting list. So, but while you're in treatment, the counselors or the, the staff, they do help you. But in the state of New Hampshire, there is that problem right now where the houses are being backed up. There are huge waiting lists, and
Did they help you get on to MAT at the treatment as well?
yep. So it's basically a standard protocol that if you are coming in to detox or detox mainly, if you're coming into detox with an opioid problem, the way they combat it most times, unless you say no, is through putting you on a Suboxone tape, putting you on Suboxone. And so then you'll be on that Suboxone so that you don't have the withdrawals and detox because it makes you comfortable. And then they most times will wean you off of the Suboxone. But for me, when I was weaning off of the Suboxone and detox, those withdrawal symptoms came back, so I chose to stay on. Because it's not a huge period that you get to withdraw off the Suboxone when you're in there, so I chose to stay on. Some people don't choose that, but I've found a lot of people do choose to stay on it for comfort reasons.
And they didn't notify you that it would limit your housing options to...
Not at first, no. But then once the housing part came into play, that's when I was notified. And at that point, once you're on, you're in treatment.
You're kind of trapped, yeah.
Yeah. So it definitely. So now, that's where it became great that I found housing with Foot because, it kind of. He's allowing me to stay there and but taper as well, which isn't a choice that I also want for myself because I am now noticing how much it does limit my choices for housing. So it's hard.
Within your agencies, is this the way they all function, or are you offering services different than others?
So... it depends on which one you mean. So I volunteer for the SMART, but then the Humble House. The Humble House is very different. We are boycotting the voluntary sober house registry. We will not go on that because we're nothing like any of these sober houses in the area, which are all 12-step based. People go through Farnham around here, which is a 3 principles secular program. And then they release people and scholarship them into mainly 12-step housing, which it can go against smart recovery principles and 3 principles when you have just some random sponsor telling you what you can and can't do, and there's the 0 tolerance policies and they kick people out for violating curfew. They have no policy to deal with people's relapses when they inevitably are going to happen. So what happens is people are kicked out of these sober houses and then they have to go back to treatment. And it's this vicious cycle that's sucking up so much funding. Rather than focusing on stable housing options that kind of sponsor and cater to the individual and the needs of the individual until they're able to fly off out of the nest with their own wings.
And the programs that you work with?
So on Celebrate Recovery, I initially was drawn to Foot and had to meet him and learn about his program. Because with a lot of the men and women coming out of incarceration needing a recovery program, I had reached out to him seeking resources, LADAC counselors, other detox counselors. While that is not what he does, he knows several people in the recovery community. He's a plethora of resources. And then after seeing what he was doing with the Humble House and learning about his SMART recovery, which I hadn't heard of historically, I attended a few of his sessions myself. Very much like Celebrate Recovery, no insurance payments. There's no billing. These are meetings that are hosted, facilitated by individuals who do not get paid a dime, dozens of meetings a week, very much like Celebrate Recovery. A few times a week, we meet, we fellowship, we have our teachings, our testimonies, our large and small groups, literature, and I was just very drawn to how passionate he was about Smart Recovery, just like I was very passionate about Celebrate Recovery, and they actually draw a tangent. They're very, very similar, just I'm driven by Christ-based, whereas his principles and his tools are not. So they do cater to a broader spectrum of people in the recovery community, where ours is Christ-based again.
But it sounds like some of these things are quite time-consuming and could be expensive.
Costly and inefficient, to say the least. If we're going to get into some hard numbers, Farnham Center here in Manchester, $12,000 a month, $600 a day for detox. I don't know exactly what their capacity is, but if we think one person that's been there for 28 days, divide that, that's $800 a month rent for 15 months, or $1,000 a month in rent and food for a whole entire year. An entire year. Just to send somebody to a program that teaches the 3 principles the entire 28 days, which I have nothing against the 3 principles. I love them. They blend right into Smart Recovery. But mind, thought, consciousness is the same principle. It's one principle. We all have a mind and we think. Smart Recovery teaches us what to do with that mind. Our thoughts are 2 types, rational and irrational. Irrational thoughts lead to anxiety, anger, emotional problems, and subsequent behavior problems. And rational thoughts are going to lead to healthy emotions and rational behavior. It's pretty simple. And our tools at Smart Recovery give people, what to do with that 3 principles. So the level of services, in my opinion, are, substandard, and the cost, it's mind-boggling to think that they could house somebody for that long and then send them out to, it's all 12-step religious-based housing that has 0 tolerance and no way to work with people through a relapse or anything like that, and then they kick them out and cycle them back through. And then, so how many times, I know multiple people that 5 or 6 times in the past year they've been through 28-day treatment. I mean, do that math. It's crazy. Does somebody have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I lived in 12-step housing, and the 12-step housing that I lived in, you are correct. If you relapse, more times than not, you are kicked out, and you have usually, sometimes, not even 24 hours to get out. Sometimes the door is locked and you're out.
Do they help people get into another situation or anything?
It depends on. They might give you some numbers to other housing, and they might give you some people to reach out to, but it's really on you, because it was your choice, and it was your you made the decision and you relapsed. So they won't really most times go out of their way to find more housing for you, but they will give you the sources and the numbers. But I've seen countless people that have relapsed just kicked out, and most times they're in homeless shelters, or one person last night that got kicked out, they were sleeping in a car. So it's tough.
So yeah, as far as profits are concerned, and it's a profitable business model, obviously, all these 12-step houses and just kicking people in and then sending them to Farnham, and then they get scholarship. They scholarship people out of Farnham back to one of these 12-step houses, and how long does somebody last for that scholarship money that's supposed to get them through a few weeks to maybe even a month? Maybe they last a week if they're lucky.
Well, why don't we take in what would the three of you come to a conclusion, and what is the best system for us to have? Let's not consider what we have at the moment. What is the goal for long term that you feel would be capable of really functioning and assisting people?
Some viable solutions.
It is of my opinion that the state could utilize some of this funding that we have been granted by federal and state to build housing, inexpensive housing. To Foot's point, the amount of money that's spent on rehabilitation for 1 year is more money than some people make in an annual income working. It's more money than I make in a year. So utilize some of these funds to purchase housing that's inexpensive, get these people in there, but you can't just be there. There has to be maintenance. And I look to some of the cities, local health and human services, mental health resources. Where are these case managers? I don't see this happening. And on the news, over and over, I'm hearing about we need recovery, we need employment, we don't want people sleeping on the streets. What are you doing? Without housing, this is not possible. And where are these people that are being funded by the state, employees of the state, who are out in the streets, beating the streets in the military, we would call it, helping to rectify, eradicate this issue? So that is, of my opinion, just to get the state involved in utilizing this money for housing. That's where it starts.
I would agree that housing is the number one thing. For anyone who knows about Maslow's hierarchy of needs pyramid, basic needs and housing is the bottom of the pyramid. You cannot have good family relations, you can't have a job, you can't do a career, go back to school or anything. And the top of the pyramid is self-actualization, which is, playing music and living your best life and having the best life. And that's the point of, my housing program, is to build on that basic needs and let people realize how important this housing aspect is. We know there's only 1% of housing available here in Manchester. Mm-hmm. The homelessness crisis is being exacerbated by the opioid crisis, and then these, funding sucks that are happening, that people are just, sucking up all this funding and not providing a coherent, cohesive, top-down, all-around, client-centered treatment from somebody all the way. What happens to these people? Who's tracking these treatment outcomes? Who's tracking how many people have gone through this place and that house that many times, and what is going on here? So I know that so many people, the housing is such an issue that people will lie, cheat, and steal to get into a house or to get into treatment just for housing. They'd say, oh, well, I need housing, well, I'll pretend that I have an addiction problem. Like, that's another real genuine valid concern, where people are taking up beds where they don't, probably deserve them.
Mm.
I was following the domestic violence decisions making, and Berlin, what they decided to do was not to spend any more money on housing. They felt that the cost for the housing was expensive, and it was only able to service like 6 people at a time, and if they stayed there for, or dozen, whatever the fixed number is. Once someone's there, they're there, and that's not available for someone else. Mm. And they've spent a lot of money for the housing. And they had determined that for emergency purposes, that type of program was good, but they felt that assisting the person directly to facilitate them having their own housing as opposed to providing it was more cost effective. Is that something you've looked at or have been working towards getting legislation?
Well, that's what we do at Humble House. We coach people. I have a lot of people come that collect Social Security disability checks. And, my main coaching at that point for them is going to be to get them to realize that they can't survive off a $700 or $800 disability check. They can work. And there's a lot of cognitive issues in working with people that's case by case, but the general consensus is that, they don't want to, they know how important that check is to their basic needs, so they're afraid to work 1 minute. They're literally paranoid and afraid to work 1 minute, which keeps them trapped in this cycle of being stuck in either a rooming house or going in and out of drug treatment. And I know a lot of people, another problem is they wait for their check to build up. They go to treatment till their next check, then they're off and running again. So like you said, to coach people from beginning to end, we have a 6-month program with 3 levels that people work through. And some people leave early before the graduation because they've saved up enough money to get off and out on their own, and that's the whole point. They can stay up to 2 years. We have 6-month extensions after the 2 years if necessary. But that's the idea, is to get people self-sufficient, self-managing, and not going back into these situations that it's affecting all of society and draining our resources. So the best way to learn more about Humble House is to find us on Facebook, Humble House. We're pretty easy to find here in Manchester. And then we also have Smart Recovery Manchester, New Hampshire Facebook page. We'd appreciate a like there. And smartrecovery.org is the main website for Smart Recovery for anyone to go to check out our resources and learn more about the Smart Recovery program.
With regards to Celebrate Recovery, you can Google Celebrate Recovery New Hampshire, GCC New Hampshire, Grace Capital Church, Celebrate Recovery, and the list of the names and the facilitators and our contact information is also listed on Celebrate Recovery, Grace Capital Church, New Hampshire.
Okay, I want to thank you all for watching us. Hopefully you'll tune in again and watch one of our other shows. Take care, be healthy, and thank you.
Thank you.